I've been a park ranger for nearly 12 years now, and I can tell you without hesitation that the wilderness holds secrets most people will never understand. We see things out there in those endless stretches of forest and mountain that defy explanation, things that make you question everything you thought you knew about the natural order of the world. Some of my colleagues have left the service because of what they've witnessed. Others refuse to patrol certain areas after dark. And a few, like me, have learned to live with the knowledge that we're never truly alone out there, even when the nearest town is 50 miles away. Tonight, I want to share 7 stories with you. These aren't campfire tales passed down through generations or urban legends that evolved over time. These are real accounts from real rangers, including myself, who have experienced the kind of terror that stays with you long after you've left the woods behind. These are the stories we don't tell visitors when they ask us about the dangers of the backcountry. We warn them about bears and mountain lions, about getting lost or caught in sudden storms, but we never mention the other things. The things that watch from between the trees. The things that shouldn't exist but somehow do. The first story takes place in Olympic National Park in Washington State. My friend Marcus had been stationed there for about 3 years when this happened, back in early spring of 2024. He was conducting a routine patrol along one of the more remote hiking trails, checking for winter damage and making sure the path was clear for the upcoming tourist season. It was late afternoon, and the forest had that peculiar quality it gets just before dusk, when the light turns golden and every shadow seems deeper than it should be. Marcus was about 6 miles from the nearest trailhead when he noticed something unusual. There was a backpack sitting in the middle of the trail, perfectly upright as if someone had set it down carefully and walked away. The pack looked relatively new, bright blue with reflective strips, and it was clearly expensive. Marcus approached cautiously, calling out to see if anyone was nearby. The forest remained silent except for the distant sound of a creek rushing somewhere to his left. He examined the backpack without touching it initially, looking for any signs of a struggle or indication that someone might be injured nearby. There were no scuff marks on the ground, no broken branches, nothing to suggest anything violent had occurred. The pack simply sat there, undisturbed, as if waiting for its owner to return. Marcus checked the surrounding area, calling out again, but received no response. The silence was starting to unnerve him. In all his years as a ranger, he'd grown accustomed to the sounds of the forest, the birds and insects and small animals that created a constant background symphony. But now there was nothing, just oppressive, heavy silence. He decided to open the backpack to look for identification. Inside, he found typical hiking gear: a water bottle, some trail mix, a first aid kit, a flashlight, and a wallet. The wallet contained a driver's license belonging to a woman named Jennifer Holloway, age 29, from Seattle. There was also a phone which Marcus tried to turn on, but the battery was dead. What struck him as odd was that everything seemed organized and intact. If someone had been attacked by an animal or had some kind of medical emergency, they wouldn't have had time to pack everything so neatly. Marcus radioed the situation in to the ranger station and continued searching the immediate area. The sun was sinking lower now, and he knew he didn't have much time before darkness would make the search impossible. He expanded his perimeter, checking off the trail in both directions, looking for any sign of Jennifer Holloway. That's when he found the shoe. Just one shoe, a hiking boot, sitting on a flat rock about 30 feet from the trail. The laces were still tied. It was positioned as if someone had carefully placed it there, not as if it had been torn off in a struggle. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine that had nothing to do with the cooling temperature. Something about the scene was profoundly wrong. He'd worked searches for missing hikers before, and they never looked like this. There was always some indication of what had happened, some clue that told a story. But this was different. This felt staged, almost like a message. He radioed again, requesting additional support and describing what he'd found. The dispatcher told him a search and rescue team would be deployed first thing in the morning. But for now, he should mark the locations of the items and return to the station before dark. Marcus didn't argue. The forest was growing darker by the minute, and that unnatural silence still pressed in around him. As he made his way back toward the trailhead, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He kept his hand on his bear spray and moved quickly, his eyes scanning the trees on either side of the trail. The feeling intensified with every step, a prickling sensation at the back of his neck that made his muscles tense. He'd felt plenty of times before when animals were nearby, but this was different. This felt deliberate, focused. About a mile from where he'd found the backpack, Marcus heard something that stopped him in his tracks. It was a voice, faint and distant, calling for help. A woman's voice. He immediately changed direction, heading toward the sound, his radio already in hand to update his position. The voice called out again, and Marcus pushed through the undergrowth, following the desperate pleas. He ran for what felt like 10 minutes, crashing through brush and jumping over fallen logs, always following that voice calling for help. But something started to feel wrong. The voice never got closer. It maintained the same distance, the same volume, no matter how fast he moved or how far he traveled. And then Marcus realized something that made his blood run cold. The voice was repeating the same phrase in exactly the same tone, with exactly the same inflection. "Help me please. Help me please. Help me please." Over and over like a recording on a loop. Marcus stopped running. His heart was pounding, and his breath came in ragged gasps. The voice continued for a few more seconds, then abruptly cut off. The silence returned, even more oppressive than before. Marcus stood there in the gathering darkness, surrounded by trees, and felt more vulnerable than he ever had in his entire life. Whatever was out there, it wasn't Jennifer Holloway. It wasn't human at all. He didn't run back to the trail. Running would have been reckless and could have led to injury. But he moved as quickly as he safely could, keeping his headlamp on and his radio close. The feeling of being watched intensified to the point where he could barely resist the urge to look over his shoulder every few seconds. When he finally reached his vehicle at the trailhead, Marcus sat in the driver's seat for a full 5 minutes, hands shaking, before he felt steady enough to drive. The search and rescue operation the next morning involved 24 people combing the area where Marcus had found Jennifer Holloway's belongings. They searched for 3 days straight using dogs and drones and every resource available. They found nothing. No body, no additional evidence, no sign of where she had gone. The backpack and shoe were the only traces that Jennifer Holloway had ever been in that forest. The official report classified her as a missing person, presumed dead due to unknown circumstances. But Marcus knew better. Marcus knew that something in those woods had taken her, and whatever it was had used her voice to try to lure him deeper into the forest. He put in for a transfer 2 weeks later. When I asked him about it over drinks one night, he just stared into his beer and said, "Some places aren't meant for people, you know? We built our trails and put up our signs and pretend like we've tamed it, but we haven't. We're just guests out there, and sometimes the real residents remind us of that." He works at a state park in Kansas now, somewhere flat and open where you can see for miles in every direction. He says he sleeps better. The second story comes from my own experience, and it happened in Yellowstone National Park in the summer of 2025. I was assigned to patrol the backcountry areas where visitors needed permits to camp, checking on registered campsites to make sure everyone was following regulations and staying safe. It was good work, peaceful for the most part, and I enjoyed the solitude of spending days at a time in the wilderness. On this particular trip, I was checking on a campsite near Heart Lake, about 8 miles from the nearest trailhead. According to our records, a solo male camper named David Chun had registered for a 3-night stay at the site. He was due to hike out the following morning, so this would be my only chance to verify that everything was in order. I reached the campsite around 2 in the afternoon, and immediately something felt off. The tent was there, a small green dome tent pitched in the designated camping area. But there was no sign of David Chin. His backpack was inside the tent, along with his sleeping bag and other gear. A bag of food hung properly from the bare pole, secured away from animals. Everything appeared to be in its proper place, exactly as an experienced camper would arrange it. Except there was no camper. I called out, thinking maybe he'd gone for a day hike or was down at the lake fishing. No response. I walked down to the shoreline, which was only about 50 yards from the campsite, and scanned the area. Heart Lake stretched out before me, its surface calm and reflective under the afternoon sun. There was no one there. I returned to the campsite and checked inside the tent more thoroughly. David Chen's wallet was there, along with his phone, which still had battery life. His car keys were in the backpack's outer pocket. This was concerning. No one goes hiking in the Yellowstone backcountry without their phone and identification, especially not far enough that they'd be gone for hours. I tried calling his emergency contact number from our permit records, but it went straight to voicemail. I radioed the situation in and was told to conduct a preliminary search of the immediate area while a response team was organized. I spent the next hour systematically searching in expanding circles around the campsite, calling David's name and looking for any indication of where he might have gone. The forest was dense in places, with thick undergrowth and fallen timber that made progress slow. I found nothing. No footprints leading away from camp, no broken branches, no signs of an animal attack. It was as if he had simply vanished from inside his tent. As the afternoon wore on and the shadows grew longer, I began to feel increasingly uneasy. There was something about the silence around that campsite that reminded me of Marcus's story. The normal sounds of the forest seemed muted, as if something was dampening them. I found myself constantly scanning the tree line, unable to shake the sensation that I was being observed. Around 5 p.m., I decided to check the tent one more time before the search and rescue team arrived. I wanted to see if there was anything I'd missed, any clue that might indicate what had happened to David Chun. I unzipped the tent entrance and leaned inside, using my flashlight to examine the interior more carefully. That's when I saw it. On the floor of the tent, partially hidden beneath the sleeping bag, there was a piece of paper. I carefully pulled it out and felt my stomach drop as I read what was written there. The note was in shaky handwriting, clearly written in haste or under extreme stress. It said, "Something came to the tent last night. It sounded like my dead brother. It knew things only he would know. It wanted me to come outside. I didn't open the door. It's still out there. I can hear it moving around. If you're reading this and I'm gone, don't stay here after dark. Don't listen to the voices. They're not real." I read the note 3 times, my hands trembling slightly. David Chen's brother had died in a car accident 5 years ago, according to the information we later found. I looked around the campsite with new eyes, suddenly aware of how exposed I was. The sun would be setting in a few hours, and the search and rescue team wouldn't arrive until tomorrow morning at the earliest. The protocol in this situation was clear: secure the scene and wait for additional support. But every instinct in my body was screaming at me to leave. I made the decision to pack up David Chen's belongings and hike back out before nightfall. I documented everything with photos, marked the GPS coordinates, and gathered all of his gear. The note went into an evidence bag. As I worked, I kept glancing at the surrounding forest, that feeling of being watched growing stronger with each passing minute. I wanted to move faster, but I forced myself to be methodical. Missing evidence could compromise the investigation. By 6 p.m., I had everything packed and ready to go. The sun was still above the horizon, but the forest was already growing dim under the canopy of trees. I shouldered my pack and David Chen's gear and started back toward the trailhead at a brisk pace. I'd covered maybe half a mile when I heard something behind me on the trail. Footsteps. Human footsteps, moving at the same pace I was, maintaining a constant distance behind me. I stopped and turned around, my hand instinctively going to the canister of bear spray on my belt. The trail behind me was empty. The footsteps had stopped when I stopped. I called out, "David? David Chen, is that you?" Nothing. Just silence and that oppressive feeling of something watching, waiting. I started walking again, faster now. The footsteps resumed behind me, matching my pace exactly. I could hear them clearly, the sound of boots on dirt and scattered pine needles. But every time I spun around, there was nothing there. The trail remained empty. My rational mind tried to find explanations. An echo, maybe, or an animal following me. But I knew the difference between animal movement and human footsteps, and I knew that sound didn't echo like that in the forest. The sun was setting now, painting the sky orange and purple through gaps in the trees. I had maybe 45 minutes of usable light left. The footsteps behind me continued, relentless and rhythmic. Then I heard something that made me freeze in place. A voice calling from behind me. My mother's voice, using my childhood nickname that only she had ever used. "Tommy, honey, wait up. I can't walk as fast as you." My mother had died of cancer 3 years ago. I hadn't heard that voice since I sat by her hospital bed on her last day. The voice called out again, closer now, and I could hear the slight breathlessness she'd always had when climbing stairs or walking uphill. It was perfect. Every inflection, every subtle characteristic that made her voice unique. If I hadn't known with absolute certainty that she was dead, I would have turned around. Instead, I ran. I don't care what the safety protocols say about running on trails. I ran like my life depended on it because some deep, primal part of my brain was convinced that it did. The voice called after me, my mother's voice, pleading with me to stop, asking why I was running away from her. Behind the voice, I could still hear those footsteps, faster now, keeping pace with my sprint. I ran for 20 minutes straight, my lungs burning and my legs screaming in protest. I didn't look back. I didn't stop. When I finally burst out of the forest at the trailhead where my vehicle was parked, I was gasping for air and drenched in sweat. The footsteps had stopped somewhere back in the trees. The voice had fallen silent, but I could feel something at the edge of the forest, just beyond the tree line, watching me as I fumbled with my keys and threw the packs into the back of my truck. I sat in that truck for a long time, doors locked, engine running, just staring at the dark line of trees. Nothing emerged. Nothing moved. But I knew it was there, whatever it was, waiting to see if I'd go back. I drove to the nearest ranger station and filed my report. The search for David Chun continued for a week. They never found a trace of him. The case remains open, classified as a missing person under suspicious circumstances. I never told anyone except my supervisor about the voice I heard or the footsteps that followed me out of the woods. Some things sound too crazy to put in an official report. But I kept the note David Chun had written. I wasn't supposed to, but I kept it. Sometimes when I'm having trouble sleeping, I take it out and read it again, reminding myself that I'm not crazy, that what I experienced was real. David Chun knew something was wrong. He tried to warn whoever found his campsite. I just wish I'd been able to get there in time to save him, though I honestly don't know if that would have been possible. The third story was told to me by a ranger named Sarah Winters who worked in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. This happened to her in the fall of 2023, during the peak of leaf watching season when the park was crowded with tourists. Sarah was assigned to patrol one of the more popular trails, dealing with the usual issues that come with heavy foot traffic. Littering, people getting too close to wildlife, the occasional lost hiker who'd wandered off the marked path. It was near the end of her shift, around 6:30 in the evening, and most of the day hikers had already headed back to their hotels and campgrounds. Sarah was doing a final sweep of the trail to make sure no one had gotten stranded after dark. She just reached a scenic overlook about 3 miles from the trailhead when she encountered a little girl standing alone at the railing, looking out over the valley below. The girl appeared to be around 7 or 8 years old, wearing a pink jacket and jeans. Her brown hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and she seemed calm, not distressed or frightened. Sarah approached carefully, concerned because there were no other hikers visible anywhere on the trail, and it was almost dark. "Hi there, sweetie," Sarah said gently. "Are you here with your parents?" The little girl turned to look at her and smiled. "I'm waiting for them," she said. "They went ahead on the trail. They told me to wait here." Sarah felt a knot of worry form in her stomach. What parents would leave a young child alone on a mountain trail as night was falling? "How long have you been waiting?" she asked. The girl shrugged. "A while. But they said they'd come back for me." Sarah radioed the situation in, providing a description of the child and asking if there were any reports of a missing girl. While she waited for a response, she tried to keep the conversation going, asking the girl's name and where she was from. "My name is Emma," the girl said. "We're visiting from Ohio." The response came back on Sarah's radio. There were no reports of missing children in the park. Sarah asked Emma if she knew her parents' names or had any way to contact them. The girl shook her head. "They don't have their phones with them. They like to disconnect when we go hiking." Something about the situation was starting to feel wrong to Sarah, though she couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was. Emma seemed too calm for a child who'd been abandoned on a mountain trail at dusk. There was something off about her demeanor, something that didn't quite fit. Sarah decided the best course of action was to walk Emma back to the trailhead and sort everything out there. "Come on, Emma," she said. "Let's head back down the trail. We can wait for your parents at the parking area where it's safer." Emma shook her head. "I can't leave. They told me to wait right here. They'll be upset if I'm not here when they get back." Sarah tried to explain that it wasn't safe to stay on the trail after dark, that they needed to go where there were lights and other people. But Emma refused to budge, growing increasingly agitated at the suggestion of leaving the overlook. Finally, Sarah made the decision that she'd have to carry the girl if necessary. She reached out to take Emma's hand. The moment Sarah's fingers touched Emma's hand, she jerked back in shock. The girl's skin was ice cold, far colder than it should have been even in the cool evening air. Felt like touching a corpse. Emma's smile widened, and Sarah noticed for the first time that the girl's eyes were wrong. They were too dark, completely black, with no visible iris or white at all. "You should leave now," Emma said, her voice suddenly different, deeper and wrong coming from a child's mouth. "This isn't a place for you after dark." Sarah stumbled backward, her hand instinctively moving to her radio. Emma just stood there, still smiling that too wide smile, her black eyes reflecting the last rays of sunlight. "Go," the girl said again, "while you still can." Sarah didn't need to be told a third time. She turned and ran back down the trail, her flashlight bobbing wildly as she navigated the darkening path. Behind her, she could hear laughter, high and childlike, but with something cruel underneath it. She didn't stop running until she reached her vehicle, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. When she reported the incident to her supervisor, Sarah was told that she'd likely encountered a lost child suffering from hypothermia, which could explain the cold skin and altered behavior. But Sarah knew what she'd seen. Those eyes weren't the result of a medical condition. That thing on the trail wasn't a little girl, or if it had been once, it wasn't anymore. She requested a transfer to a different sector of the park and never patrolled that trail again. The strange part came 2 weeks later when Sarah was going through old incident reports, researching something unrelated. She found a report from 1998, nearly 25 years earlier. A family from Ohio had been hiking that same trail when their 8-year-old daughter, Emma Richardson, had vanished. She was last seen at the scenic overlook, where her parents had stopped to take photographs. They turned away for just a moment, and when they looked back, Emma was gone. Despite an extensive search, no trace of her was ever found. The case remained unsolved. Sarah looked at the photo attached to the report, a school picture of a smiling girl with brown hair in a ponytail, wearing a pink jacket. It was the same girl she'd encountered on the trail, unchanged after 25 years, still waiting at that overlook for parents who would never return. The fourth story takes place in Denali National Park in Alaska, and it's one of the most disturbing accounts I've ever heard. A ranger named James Kowalski shared this with me during a conference last year, and I could see his hands shaking as he recounted the experience. James had been working in Denali for 8 years when this incident occurred in the summer of 2024. He was conducting a multi-day backcountry patrol, checking on remote areas that didn't see much human activity. This was serious wilderness, the kind of place where you could hike for days without encountering another person. James was experienced and well-equipped, comfortable spending extended periods alone in the Alaskan wilderness. On the 3rd day of his patrol, he made camp near a small creek in a valley surrounded by mountains. Everything was normal that first evening. James set up his tent, filtered water from the creek, prepared a simple dinner, and settled in to enjoy the long Alaskan twilight. The sky remained bright until nearly midnight at that latitude during summer, so he spent the evening reading and making notes in his patrol log. Around 11 p.m., he finally climbed into his sleeping bag and drifted off to sleep. He woke up around 2 in the morning to the sound of something moving around outside his tent. His first thought was bear, and he immediately became alert, listening carefully to assess the situation. The sound was definitely large, something moving through the brush near his campsite. But there was something odd about the rhythm of the movement. It wasn't the steady, purposeful gait of a bear or moose. It sounded almost hesitant, irregular, as if whatever was out there was searching for something. James lay perfectly still in his sleeping bag, barely breathing, waiting to see what would happen. The sound circled his tent, moving from one side to the other. Then it stopped directly outside the tent entrance. James could hear breathing, heavy and labored, almost like someone who'd been running. Then a voice spoke, barely above a whisper. "Help me. Please, I need help." James froze. There was no one else who should have been in this area. This was deep backcountry, miles from any established trail. The likelihood of encountering another person was extremely low. But the voice sounded desperate, frightened. Every instinct as a ranger told him to help, to unzip that tent and see what was wrong. But something held him back. Something about the voice wasn't quite right. "Please," the voice said again, louder this time. "I'm hurt. I need help. Please open the door." That's what stopped James cold. Door. The voice had said door, not tent. That was wrong. James stayed silent, his heart hammering in his chest. Outside, the thing continued to speak, pleading for help, insisting that it was injured and needed assistance. But now that James was paying close attention, he noticed other things that were wrong. The cadence of the speech was off, too formal, like someone reading from a script, and underneath the words, he could hear something else. A wet, clicking sound, like chittering insects or something with a mouth that wasn't shaped quite right trying to form human words. The voice changed tactics. It started speaking in different voices, cycling through what sounded like recordings of different people. A man's voice, then a woman's, then a child's, all begging for help, all asking James to open the door. He pressed himself against the back of the tent, as far from the entrance as he could get. His knife gripped in one sweating hand and his bear spray in the other. This went on for over an hour. The thing outside his tent tried voice after voice, plea after plea. Sometimes it would go silent for a few minutes, and James would start to hope it had left. Then it would start again, the wet clicking sound now dominating the attempts at speech, as if whatever was out there was growing frustrated and losing its ability to maintain the human mimicry. Finally, around 3:30 in the morning, the sound stopped. James lay awake for the rest of the night, knife in hand, waiting for the attack he was certain would come. But nothing happened. When dawn finally broke and light filled the tent, James cautiously unzipped the entrance and looked outside. His campsite appeared undisturbed. There were no tracks in the soft earth around his tent, no signs that anything had been there at all. But when he emerged from the tent, James noticed something that made his blood run cold. There were handprints on the outside of his tent, dozens of them, covering nearly every square inch of the nylon fabric. But they weren't normal handprints. They had too many fingers, thin and elongated, and they were positioned at odd angles, as if whatever made them could rotate its hands in ways human hands couldn't. James packed up his camp in record time and hiked straight back to the nearest ranger station, cutting his patrol short by 2 days. He filed a report describing an encounter with an unknown animal that demonstrated potentially aggressive behavior toward humans. He didn't mention the voices or the handprints. Those details stayed off the record, shared only with a few trusted colleagues who'd had similar experiences. But James did take photographs of those handprints before he left, and he showed them to me on his phone during our conversation. I've seen a lot of things in my years as a ranger, but I've never seen anything like those prints. They weren't from any animal I could identify, and they certainly weren't human. James doesn't patrol the backcountry alone anymore. He says he'll never spend another night in a tent by himself in the wilderness. Some of us understood that decision completely. The fifth story comes from Yosemite National Park and involves a ranger named Michael Santos. This happened during the winter of early 2026, just a few months ago. Yosemite in winter is a different place than the crowded summer park most people imagine. Many of the high country trails are closed due to snow, and visitor numbers drop dramatically. The few rangers on duty during this season often work in relative isolation. Michael was assigned to check on winter cabins in a remote section of the park, making sure they were secure and that no unauthorized persons were using them. These cabins were simple structures, built decades ago and maintained for emergency shelter. Most were only accessible by skiing or snowshoeing several miles from the nearest plowed road. It was demanding work, but Michael enjoyed the solitude and the stark beauty of the snow-covered landscape. He checked 3 cabins without incident and was approaching the 4th around mid-afternoon. The sky was overcast, threatening more snow, and the temperature was dropping rapidly. This particular cabin sat in a small clearing surrounded by tall pines, their branches heavy with snow. As Michael approached, he noticed something that immediately concerned him. There was smoke coming from the cabin's chimney. Someone was inside, which meant either an authorized ranger was using the cabin for overnight shelter, or someone had broken in. Michael called out as he approached, identifying himself as a park ranger and asking whoever was inside to come out. There was no response. The cabin remained silent except for the faint sound of the fire crackling inside. Michael tried the door and found it unlocked. He pushed it open slowly, calling out again. The interior of the cabin was dim, lit only by the fire burning in the stone fireplace. The single room was furnished simply. A wooden table with 2 chairs, a cot with a mattress, some shelves with basic supplies. And sitting at the table, facing the fire with his back to the door, was a man. "Excuse me, sir," Michael said firmly. "This cabin is Park Service property. I'm going to need to see your identification and your backcountry permit." The man didn't respond. He didn't move at all. Michael felt a spike of concern. Could the person be injured or suffering from hypothermia? He stepped into the cabin, closing the door behind him to keep the heat in. "Sir, are you okay? Can you hear me?" Still nothing. Michael moved around to the side, trying to get a look at the man's face. What he saw made him stop dead in his tracks. The man was elderly, probably in his 70s, with weathered skin and white hair. He was dressed in an old-fashioned park ranger uniform, the kind that hadn't been used since the 1960s. His eyes were open, staring at the fire, but they didn't blink. They didn't move at all. "Sir." Michael reached out hesitantly and touched the man's shoulder. The flesh beneath the uniform was rigid and cold. This man was dead, had been dead for some time based on the stiffness. But that was impossible. The fire in the fireplace was fresh, burning hot, and someone had to have lit it within the past hour. Michael backed away from the corpse, his hand fumbling for his radio. The cabin suddenly felt much smaller, the shadows in the corners deeper and more threatening. He was backing toward the door when the dead man's head turned. Slowly, with a grinding, creaking sound like rusted gears, the head rotated until those glassy, dead eyes were looking directly at Michael. The mouth opened, and a voice emerged, dry and papery like whined through dead leaves. "You shouldn't be here when it gets dark." Michael ran. He burst through the cabin door and ran through the snow, not even bothering to put his skis back on, just running in his boots, floundering through drifts that came up to his knees. Behind him, he could hear the cabin door slam open and the sound of something following him. Not running, just walking steadily, inexorably, crunching through the snow at a measured pace that somehow kept up with Michael's panic sprint. He ran for what felt like miles but was probably less than one, until his lungs burned and his legs felt like they would give out. When he finally stopped and looked back, there was nothing behind him but undisturbed snow and darkening forest. Whatever had been following him had vanished, or perhaps had never left the cabin at all. Michael made it back to his vehicle just as full darkness fell. He sat there shaking, trying to make sense of what he'd experienced. When he finally managed to compose himself enough to report in, he simply said he'd found the cabin empty but felt unwell and was returning to the station. He didn't mention the body or the thing that had chased him through the snow. 2 days later, after Michael had convinced himself he'd hallucinated the entire experience due to altitude or dehydration or something, a different ranger was sent to check on that same cabin. They found it exactly as it should be. Cold, empty, no fire in the fireplace, no sign that anyone had been there in months. The furniture was covered in a thick layer of dust. There was no body, no old ranger uniform, nothing to substantiate Michael's experience. But when Michael was going through the park's historical archives later, trying to find some explanation for what he'd seen, he found a photograph from 1967. It showed a ranger named Robert Mitchell who had died in that very cabin during a winter patrol. He'd suffered a heart attack while checking the structure, and his body wasn't found until spring when the snow melted. The man in the photograph, dressed in his vintage uniform, was the same man Michael had seen sitting at that table, staring into the fire. Michael requested a transfer to a different park. He works in Death Valley now, somewhere with endless open views and nowhere for shadows to hide. He told me he doesn't care how hot it gets in the desert summer. At least when you see something there, you know it's real and not a ghost of a ranger who died 50 years ago. The sixth story is actually a recent one from just last month, December 2025. A ranger named Ashley Martinez was working in Big Bend National Park in Texas when she had an experience that still has her questioning what she saw. Ashley was conducting a sunrise patrol in the Chizos Mountains, checking on a popular hiking trail before the day's visitors arrived. It was that magical time just before dawn when the sky is lightening but the sun hasn't yet appeared over the horizon. The desert landscape was painted in shades of purple and deep blue, and the air was cool and still. Ashley loved this time of day, the peace and quiet before the park came alive with activity. She was walking along the trail, checking for any hazards or maintenance issues, when she noticed something ahead. There was a group of people standing in a circle on the trail, about 50 yards ahead of her position. Ashley's first thought was that these were early morning hikers, though it was unusual to see a group that large on the trail at this hour. As she got closer, she could see there were 7 or 8 figures, all standing perfectly still, facing inward toward the center of their circle. Ashley called out a greeting as she approached, but none of the figures responded or turned to acknowledge her. They just stood there, motionless. Something about their stillness struck Ashley as unnatural. Even a group of people standing in conversation would have some movement, someone shifting their weight or gesturing. These figures were as still as statues. She slowed her pace, suddenly wary. "Hello? Is everything okay?" Still no response. Ashley was close enough now to see details. The figures were all wearing identical dark clothing, and they were all the same height, which was strange. Their heads were bowed, as if they were looking at something on the ground in the center of their circle. Ashley stopped about 20 feet away, every instinct telling her that something was very wrong. She could see now that there was something in the center of the circle, something dark on the ground, but she couldn't make out what it was from this angle. "This is Park Ranger Martinez," she said in her most authoritative voice. "I need you all to identify yourselves and explain what you're doing here." One of the figures raised its head. In the growing light of dawn, Ashley saw its face, and what she saw made her stomach clench with terror. It wasn't a human face. The proportions were wrong, the features too smooth and undefined, like a mannequin or a clay sculpture of a person that hadn't been finished. Where eyes should have been were just smooth depressions. There was a slit for a mouth but no nose, no ears. The figure's head tilted to one side, and that terrible mouth opened. A sound came out, a high-pitched tone that rose and fell in a pattern that hurt Ashley's ears and made her head throb. The other figures all raised their heads in unison, revealing the same blank, unfinished faces. They all began making that sound, their mouths moving in perfect synchronization. Ashley backed away slowly, her hand on her radio but unable to take her eyes off the scene before her. The figures began to move, turning to face her, and she could see now what was in the center of their circle. It was a backpack, shredded to pieces, with what looked like personal belongings scattered around it. And there was something else, something dark and wet that Ashley's mind refused to process. The figures took a step toward her, moving as one, still making that terrible sound. Ashley turned and ran, sprinting back down the trail the way she'd come. She ran for 10 minutes straight, putting as much distance as possible between herself and those things. When she finally stopped, gasping for breath, she looked back. The trail was empty. Dawn had fully broken now, and in the clear morning light, there was nothing unusual visible on the path ahead. Ashley called for backup and waited at the trailhead until other rangers arrived. Together, they went back to the location where she'd seen the figures. They found the backpack, or what was left of it. It belonged to a hiker named Robert Simmons who'd been reported missing 3 days earlier. They found his phone, his wallet, and pieces of his clothing. They also found blood, a significant amount of it, soaked into the sandy soil. But they didn't find Robert Simmons, and they didn't find any trace of the figures Ashley had seen. The official investigation concluded that Robert Simmons had likely been killed by a mountain lion, and his body had been dragged away and cached somewhere in the surrounding terrain. Mountain lions sometimes cover their kills to return to later. The shredded backpack and scattered belongings fit that scenario. But mountain lions don't stand in circles on hiking trails. Mountain lions don't have smooth, featureless faces and don't make sounds that hurt your ears and make you dizzy. Ashley still works at Big Bend, but she never does solo sunrise patrols anymore. She always makes sure she has a partner when she's out on the trails before dawn or after dusk. Some of the other rangers think she's being paranoid, but a few of the older ones, the ones who've worked in the park for decades, understand. They've seen things too, things they don't talk about in official reports or casual conversation. They know that the desert holds secrets just as dark as any forest. The final story is mine, and it happened just 3 weeks ago in early December 2025 in Rocky Mountain National Park in Colorado. I was wrapping up a winter season patrol, checking on a section of trail that would be closing for the season due to heavy snow. It was late afternoon and I was alone, which was normal for this type of routine check. The sky was heavy with clouds, threatening the snowstorm that had been forecasted for that evening. I was about 4 miles into the backcountry when I noticed tracks in the snow ahead of me. Boot prints, recent ones, made within the past hour based on how crisp the edges were. This concerned me because this trail was already technically closed to visitors, and anyone hiking out here was taking a serious risk with the incoming storm. I followed the tracks, moving quickly, hoping to catch up to whoever had made them and escort them back to safety. The tracks led off the main trail and into the forest, winding between trees and over fallen logs. This made me even more concerned. Getting lost in a snowstorm in this terrain could be fatal. I called out repeatedly as I followed the tracks, but heard no response. The forest was silent except for the soft sound of wind through the pines. I followed those tracks for nearly an hour, going deeper into areas that even I rarely patrolled. The tracks never wavered, never showed signs that the person was lost or confused. They moved with purpose, heading steadily uphill toward the mountain peaks. And here's what started to bother me. The tracks never got any fresher. I was moving faster than whoever had made them should have been able to move through this terrain, but I never closed the distance. The tracks always looked like they'd been made about an hour ago. Then I noticed something that stopped me cold. The tracks I was following weren't quite right. The stride length was too long, and the depth of the impressions varied in a way that didn't match normal walking. Some prints were deep, as if made by someone very heavy, while others were barely visible, as if made by someone nearly weightless. And the shape of the boot prints themselves was slightly wrong, elongated in a way that didn't match any hiking boot I'd ever seen. I'd been lured away from the trail, led deep into the backcountry by something that was leaving tracks that looked almost but not quite human. I realized this just as the light began to fail and the first snowflakes started to fall. I was in serious trouble. I was miles from the trail, darkness was coming, and a storm was starting. I immediately stopped following the tracks and pulled out my GPS, plotting the fastest route back to the trail. As I turned to head back, I saw something that made my heart skip a beat. There was a figure standing in the trees about 30 yards away, watching me. It was tall, much taller than any person, and its proportions were wrong. The limbs were too long, the body too narrow, and it was wearing boots. Human boots on feet that clearly weren't human. We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity but was probably only a few seconds. Then the thing turned and walked away into the forest, its movements fluid but wrong, like watching film of a person played back at slightly the wrong speed. I didn't wait to see if it would come back. I hiked back to the trail as fast as I safely could, using my GPS and my knowledge of the terrain to navigate through the gathering darkness and snow. I made it back to my vehicle just as the storm hit in earnest. I sat there in the driver's seat, heater blasting, watching the snow pile up on the windshield, and thought about how close I'd come to spending the night out there, lost in a blizzard, being hunted by something that left almost human tracks in the snow. I filed a report about observing unusual animal behavior and recommended that area be flagged for careful monitoring. I didn't describe what I'd really seen or admit that I'd been foolish enough to follow obvious bait tracks that far from the trail. But I learned my lesson. The wilderness is full of things that know exactly how to exploit our instincts to help people, our training to follow up on any sign of someone in trouble. Whatever had made those tracks knew I would follow them. It wanted to lead me away from safety, into the deep forest where no one would find me before spring. So those are the 7 stories I wanted to share with you tonight. 7 experiences from 7 different rangers in 7 different parks, all sharing a common thread. There are things in the wilderness that we don't understand, things that shouldn't exist according to everything we know about the natural world. Things that watch us from the shadows and sometimes decide to interact with us in ways that defy explanation. I still work as a ranger. I still love these wild places despite what I've experienced. But I'm more cautious now, more aware that the rules I learned in training don't cover every situation I might encounter. I trust my instincts more and question less when something tells me to leave an area or not to investigate a strange sound or unusual track. If you're planning to visit our national parks, please don't let these stories scare you away. The wilderness is beautiful and awe-inspiring, and the vast majority of people who visit our parks have wonderful, safe experiences. But do follow the rules. Stay on marked trails. Don't hike alone if you can avoid it. Camp in designated areas. And if something doesn't feel right, if your instincts are telling you that something is wrong, listen to them. Don't investigate strange sounds in the night. Don't follow mysterious voices calling from the forest. Don't trust that everything you encounter out there is what it appears to be. The wilderness will always have mysteries, places where the normal rules don't quite apply, where things exist that we don't have names for. Respect that, Respect the fact that we're visitors in a world that was here long before us and will be here long after we're gone. And most importantly, remember that just because something looks human or sounds human doesn't mean it is. Stay safe out there, and maybe keep a light on tonight,